Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Ryan Ride Mechanic channel. How the heck are you doing today? Today, I wanted to talk about what mechanics carry in their ride purse. And by ride purse, of course, I mean what we carry out to rides. Typical response bag. What the tools we carry to a ride. Anyways, let's get into it.
Now get ready. Here we go.
So when we talk about mechanics, first question that comes up a lot of times is what type of tools do they require? And then I wanted to narrow that down a little bit because it's a very broad question. So I kind of developed a sub-response for that was the mechanics require what tools they need to answer ride calls. So we're not talking about the morning time or the evening time when rides are being inspected and taken apart to be inspected. We're talking about the ride is up and running and either operations has a problem with it or it's a shutdown for some reason. What does the mechanic show up to with that in mind? Now, there are plenty of factors to play with here. There's so many that's just you can't even touch on all of them. So the first thing is that it boils down to the design of the park. So mechanics carry more tools with them if they have a method to get around the park. And by that I mean if they've got a golf cart or a truck that they could drive up to the ride, they're going to carry a lot of tools with them to every call pretty much because they can. Everything is there. They can almost bring everything they own. Not quite, but they could bring a lot. And they're going to do that. So where I worked, the park was originally designed as an animal park, not an amusement park. It was designed as a zoo, basically. And because of that, the park did not have internal pathways to get around on, which means that during the day, when a ride on the other side of the park broke down, I had to take the same exact path that all the guests are walking on at the same time. And that adds a level of stress to things, trust me. It's like when you're trying to get to a ride that's broken down with people on it and you got guests stopping you and say, hey, where's the nearest popcorn stand? And the mantra is like, yeah, you need to show them or guide them to that nearest popcorn stand, even though you got a ride broken down with people on it. It's conflict. That's neither here nor there. Some places, like I know Disney's this way, they do not want mechanics carrying tools around. They don't want them carrying big bags around. They want them as carrying as little as possible. I know I've seen people, maintenance, and I believe show productions too as well at Disneyland. They came with their keys in a foldable pouch that was hanging off their side. And I was like, well, that's interesting. They literally did not want the keys making noise as they walked around. So they put them in a little like quiet pouch. It's like, that's interesting. So what I'm going to talk about right now is a mechanic's response bag for an open park and one where you don't really have the way to get through and carry a ton of tools. So this is what I would say is just the bare necessity tools to go to a ride call. So one of the first things you have to do at every ride call, no matter what, is you have to get your PPE out, which, I mean, most of the time, like a lot of us wore sunglasses while we were out there. Well, we bought the ones that were rated. They were already safety glasses at that point in time. So you typically didn't have to think about bringing safety glasses. But when you work on hydraulic and pneumatic systems and stuff like that, you definitely need your PPE. So safety glasses, number one thing. Next thing is almost everything has a cut hazard. So we bring gloves to every call. Now, if you're worried about a biological hazard, like somebody threw up on something and you're worried about that sort of stuff, typically at the ride ops, somewhere there, they have a biohazard kit or a spill kit, which a lot of times has gloves in it, like rubber gloves that you could wear just to protect yourself from biohazards. And then, of course, if it's ever something like there's blood on something, maintenance is not trained to deal with blood. So if you ever have blood on something, you have to call first aid out to the ride, and you have to wait until they come up and sanitize the area because of bloodborne pathogen risk. Like, you don't want to get involved in that sort of stuff. So it was pretty rare. Sometimes people would get nosebleeds on ride. Sometimes they could, they got on and they were trying to get their hand out of their pocket fast, and it's put a big scar down their hand, and now they're bleeding on the ride. For women, once in a while, they just bled on the ride, if you know what I mean. It happens, just a human thing. But every time one of those calls would go out, and they would call it it was like a 40B for blood. And it would always perk up my attention, because I'm like, what happened? Did the ride mess up? Is someone in, like, what's going on? Because I would always go to the worst case scenario. Someone got injured on the ride. And all the time I'd call up, oh no, they fell, they cut their hand, and when they fell down, oh, they just got a nosebleed, something else like that. So one of my first responses was always to call up and find out why there is blood on that vehicle. And then they just had to wait. Maintenance never needed to show up. They just had to wait for first aid to show up and sanitize the area again, and then the ride can go back under operation. So gloves is the first thing we bring. Next thing down the line is one of these guys. This is a Multitool. Probably recognize them. They're made by all sorts of different manufacturers. They have all sorts of different stuff in them. Like this, there's a knife there. There's files and stuff like that inside there. Flip it around and you got a pair of pliers. Like, these are very handy because you never know what you're going to come across. You never know when you're going to have to do something with these. So this is like an all-in-one tool. Mechanics love carrying around all-in-one stuff because it saves a lot of weight in the bag or a pouch. I didn't go over that, but sometimes we carry a pouch like on our belt that houses all these tools in there. They're kind of a little big, but not too bad. And sometimes mechanics opt to carry an over-the-shoulder bag, or your response purse, as it was, with all the tools inside of it. That way they have everything that they need when they go to a ride call. Next step, one of these guys. This is a pocket screwdriver. Very simple. It's simply just Phillips on one side, and then these are nice because you take them out, flip them around like that. It's flathead on the other side, and then it's got a magnetic pickup on there, so you can get that. Along with the PPE, earplugs. A lot of times you're in mechanical areas, and these are a lot louder than your normal ride operation area. So air compressors and hydraulic systems and stuff like that going, you want to make sure you have earplugs. That way you can work comfortably around that thing. Comfortably is the key term, because you can go near it momentarily, but if you're going to be standing there troubleshooting for a while, you better protect those ears. Otherwise, you're going to wind up with hearing damage. In the event that a ride cannot continue operation, whether it be with people on it and you have to do an evacuation, or you just I just need to clear the queue line out because the ride's going to be down for a while. We have a repair. It's going to take like an hour or 2 or 3 to make. So on the control system, you put a lockout on that. This is a lockout. It's really simple. You take the lock off of it, pull the disconnect down, and then when the disconnect comes down in the off position, 2 holes line up with each other like that. And then you take this hasp like this, and you open it up, and you put it through those 2 holes, and you close it back down on there. And then once it's closed, you put your lock on it and lock it. So normally, I don't have one here with me, but normally you'd also have a tag on this lock as well, and it says, do not operate, danger, has your name, typically your date. A lot of parks put the picture on them so you know exactly whose it is. But this is one of those things that's heavily proceduralized, and by that I mean just the act of hanging this on something is enough for everyone to stop and ask questions and really dig into it before they do anything. I don't care what it is. If I came to an area of the park and there was a ride Then they were like, oh yeah, so-and-so was working on it or something, and I show up and that disconnect handle is sitting there in the on position, but with that guy just hanging on it like that, no lock, no nothing. I'm not touching anything on that ride until I figure out why this was there. This is an absolute life safety thing, and everyone needs to understand the importance when they see a lock hanging on something, because that means there's a good chance somebody's life could be in danger if you manipulated this lock right here. So some of the rides, we put locking e-stops down there, so you push the e-stop down and then you could lock this around it. Those were also very proceduralized because you could not do things like get into an electrical cabinet and things like that. Like, couldn't do that with these. You had to go down and throw the main power switch to eliminate the voltage hazard, or pneumatic, whatever else might be there. So lockout always on you at all times, because you never know when you're going to need it. Just like a lockout, when you show up to a ride, you typically need to switch it into a manual mode or get into fences or something like that. So you have a barrage of keys that you have to take with you. My key ring used to be separated into 3 rings, because when I put the floorless coaster away at the end of the night or pulled it out in the morning time, you needed to have 3 independent keys on there, so they could not be right next to each other. They were, about 12 inches apart. So you had to have 3 independent key rings in order to put all 3 in that thing at the same time. So this is typically always hear mechanics walking around with lots and lots of keys on them. Next is an inspection mirror. You never know when you're going to need to get around and see something in an area where you really can't see it. This flashlight kind of go hand in hand, although in the later days the flashlight was replaced with simply just a cell phone, and I honestly replaced my inspection mirror with my cell phone also. I just took it, turned the camera on with the light on top of it, and then stuck it behind, and then filmed what was ever there. Nice part about that is looking back at the video, you can pause it, screenshot it, and say, oh, there's the part number or whatever it was off of there. Most of the time, you use stuff like this because there's a panel on something, and right behind the panel, there's like a fluid level or something like that, and you got to stick a mirror down on the inside to try to see where the fluid level is at about that. In the morning time, you could just take like the 20 screws off the panel, but in the evening time, it's not so much. If you haven't done so already and you're watching the video, please like and subscribe. Let me know how it's going. Let me know some ideas of future stuff you want to see and suggestions for anything you want to talk about. I'm very responsive. Typically, I like to respond to comments, and I will try to do my best when I get them. 2 things that always went hand in hand with each other was your orange vest, because, well, this is green, but it's a high visibility vest, which is what you needed when you're out working on rides, because you have to be seen at all times. So they always needed a contrasting color for where I worked. Some parks, I've seen them adopt, like the maintenance uniform simply has the reflective stripes right on the uniform, and it's still just like a gray uniform, which is acceptable by some standards, but not where I was. And then the second one is radio. The radio is your best friend. This one will save you a lot of times. They'll be like, oh man, I need something brought to me. Can someone bring this to me? So we'll call out and ask for another mechanic if anyone's available to bring something down to the ride. If you're making a call like this, there's only a certain number of things you could say on the radio, not a lot, because everyone listens to the radio. Everyone in the park turns to the maintenance channel, and they're not like quiet about it either. They turn this guy all the way up as loud as it'll go, and they just sit there and listening to it. So whatever you're saying, you can hear it broadcasted all over the park. So you want to make sure if you're saying something sensitive, like I've got a cracked brake ski out here or something like that, you don't say that stuff over the radio. You make a phone call. You pull your phone out and you call somebody, because that sort of stuff is not to go out. And if you don't have a phone with you, the typical ride operator panel has a phone, and you can call somebody in the extension. Say, hey, I've got a bigger problem out here. I need some help. Get some people coming. Another pocket tool that's really helpful to have is a scale. This is a 6-inch mechanics rule. It's got both imperial and It's got both SAE and metric on it, so you can read and measure things on there, because that really helps to know. Say, oh, I need to respace this. It's supposed to be 10 millimeters away, but you don't have anything with you. Well, there it is right there. I'd use this guy so much. It's like my number one tool I would go to, more so than a pen to sign things off. I would go for this guy to measure and look at, put it up against something and find out if it's straight or not. Like, this guy I used a lot. Next thing, Allen wrenches or socket head cap screwdrivers. These guys are also great to have on most of your smaller rides that use hydraulic systems to lift and lower. You have an SEP valve on that hydraulic valve body. That valve is typically a Allen drive to open it. So if you go to one of these little kids rides and it's stuck up in the air, they're only stuck up there about 5 feet. But if it's stuck up in the air and you need to get it down, power failure or something like that, you would need one of these tools to stick in there. It's typically the 5 millimeter or a 4 millimeter to stick it in the valve body and open up the bypass valve that slowly lets the canopy come back down inside of there. Then on a lot of rides, there's just a lot of socket head cap screws in general, so these guys are needed to hold one side because you can't with another wrench. Which brings me to my other wrenches. Pretty much every mechanic around should carry 2 crescent wrenches because it covers pretty much everything. It covers SAE, covers imperial, it covers things that have been rounded out, it covers an occasional bar that you just have to grab a hold of for more leverage. It can be used as a crow's foot to get in there and try to twist on something. These are very useful in the right hands. Extremely dangerous in the wrong hands. If you know how to use one of these, great. If not, they are directional. I'll tell you that right now. So there's a fat end and a thin end on there. Basically, the fat end always takes the load of the weight, and the thin end just holds it. So the second type is just some wrenches. Some mechanics carry wrenches around with them, box end, open end type wrenches, and they end up carrying like a full set from like typically metric, which is like it'll be the useful sizes are going to be your 10 through 19. So 10, 12, and 19 millimeters being the most sizes you're going to use. I found these by Gear Wrench. No, not sponsored. Found these by Gear Wrench. They're absolutely great to have around. These are called quad drive wrenches, and they're box end, but they also ratchet on both sides. And what's great about that is that on one side it's a 19 millimeter and on the other side it's an 18 millimeter. So you actually have 4 ratcheting wrenches on this one, and in the smaller size you have 4 ratcheting wrenches on this one. Also great. These are awesome to carry around with you, but they are limited because sometimes you can't get on top of the fastener and you need an open end, and sometimes that's too big and you need an open end with that one, in which case you could try a pair of pliers. Doubt it's going to work, but at that point you're probably going to be calling for help anyway, so just have someone bring the right tool to you when they show up. Last thing is this guy. This is just a screwdriver. That's all it is, nothing special, no high electricity rating, nothing like that. But this one I found from Craftsman. I don't even know if they still make it. It's pretty old, but I had like almost everybody in the department get one of these at one point in time because everyone loved it. It was great. This is a 6-in-1 screwdriver. Now, I know there's a lot of people that say, oh yeah, you could take the tip out and you can reverse it and put it back in. It's like, nope. It accepts most tips on there like that. But when you pull it back, there's 6 tips loaded inside of here. So you can just rotate it and put it back in. I don't know if you can see that or that, but that is a small Phillips head. It's like a P1. If I take this out, go over 3, put it back up, that is a 1/8-inch flathead. Right. Go over, come back. That is a 1/4-inch flathead now. There's a T15 driver right there, a little Torx bit, T15. Extremely useful to have. This is basically 6 screwdrivers in one, and you can load it up with whatever you use most. Do you work on wood stuff and you need a bunch of T20 Torx heads in there? Do you need a lot of panel stuff, or you need a small flathead? Do you need a big P4 for working on large screws like CPAC screws on a boomerang or something like that? Very useful to have. Now, outside of that, those are just the very basics that I tell mechanics they should have something like that. Not required, but they just should have it, because those are kind of some general good all-around tools to use. Things that I didn't mention is stuff like I always kept electrical tape on me. Always had a roll of electrical tape on me. I also had a little bag because I did lots of wiring stuff. I did lots of controls. So I always had a bag of terminal ends. I always had a bag of wire nuts and stuff like that, so I can get into things and do what I need to do. Now, once you're outside the basic package like that, you get into the mechanics specialty of whatever they do. So if you're a hydraulic guy and you're always working on hydraulics, you might carry some specialty hydraulic tools around with you to work on stuff that you normally work with. I was electrical. I dealt with controls. Not solely. I still had to do all the mechanical too, but my specialty was controls. So I carried around some extra stuff. A nice panel screwdriver like that. This guy was great. Nice and insulated. I'd get on live terminals, 120, 220 bolts, and tighten them down without having to worry about getting shocked by that guy. So a nice panel screwdriver always worked great. Plus, when you tighten wire terminals, sometimes you really need to get on it with these things. And a smaller one will just round off the bottom, and typically it damages everything. You don't want to do that. So I always carried around a nice panel screwdriver. Because I was testing things, I have this guy. Let's see, this is a Fluke. Fluke makes this little guy. It's great because it's a little pin, fits in your pocket, and on one side it's a little hook, so I can go inside of something underneath and grab wires and move them over. It's phenolic. It's not. It doesn't make any electrical contact, so you can stick it inside where voltage is, and you don't have to worry about getting shocked. So insulated completely. It's like great. You can stick it in there and move wires around. The little hook is great because when you find something, you can tug on it a little bit and find out if it's loose. Can't tell you how many ride calls I've been to where something was messing up, and I stuck this guy in there and grabbed the bottom of the loop and just tugged on it, and the wire just came right out of the relay. And it's like, I think I found the problem. And then the other side, this side is conductive. It's metal, but you can stick that guy in there and twist and turn and try to override things and pull things out like that. But honestly, I've never used this side. I mean, even looking at it right now, it still has a plastic protector on it. Like, I dealt with electrical a lot, so I didn't find the use for this guy because I'm like, I don't want to stick something metal inside of there. It wasn't useful for me, so I was like, I didn't use that. But I used the other end like crazy. I used this all over the place. That was a great tool for me. I also always carried around a pair of wire pliers, so I can strip wire off, crimp things, tighten things. These are great. This was right in this was also one of my number one go-to tools. You just reach in there and you can grab things, twist them, and then make new wire connections. Because why would you have to make new wire connections? Like, if you've ever worked on a water ride, that's why. That's why. Because your low voltage DC is great until it meets water. And then that copper wire turns black. And it's no longer conductive at that point. So you take the wire nuts off of something and you have black copper on it. And it's like, oh man. So I go back, pull it out, 12 inches, cut it, strip the end back off of that guy, still black. 12 inches, cut it, strip the end off. It's green now, better. 12 inches, cut it, strip it, light green, almost there. Another 12 inches, cut it, strip it, copper, yay. And we could put the wire back together at that point in time. And I know the next question, there's that much wire inside of junction boxes and stuff? No. Unless it's a water ride that I work on all the time, because I put a lot of extra wire and stuff like that. That's like, oh, how many we need? We pull a new wire through junction boxes. I'm like, I pull it out, about 3 feet, what you need to make your connections and be happy there. And I'm just like, I'm like, okay, this should be good. And then if you do work on wire and areas like that, 3M sells epoxy resin bags, which are great. Squish them together, the resin starts to kick off, and then you stick the wiring pack inside of there so it seals the whole thing. Those are good. And then this was my biggest tool right here, which is a voltmeter. And these things don't need to be anything fancy. I know a lot of people that worked on electronics, and they're like, my multimeter costs $15,000 or whatever it was. I'm like, it's overkill for what we're doing. I mean, this is your typical multimeter. This one's by Craftsman. Got 2 leads rated up to, let's see, I think this is a class 3, so 600 volts. So it does, as a temperature probe I could put onto it if I wanted to, although I never really used it. But I can check continuity and resistance and everything else across there. And then the fun part is that this has a nice little clamp on top of it where I can check induction inside of a wire to find out how much amperage a motor is pulling. And this is surprisingly a nice little meter because this not only does AC on the clamp up here, it also does DC as well. Dealt with a lot of DC stuff, but it's funny, a lot of high dollar meters, they don't have DC on their clamps. It's like, this wasn't high dollar. It was like 70 or 80 bucks at the time. And I've been through a lot with this guy, but yeah, anything electrical, test before touch. Never assume it's off. Always assume it's live. And this little guy will save your life if you ever make a mistake, because you'll put it on there and be like, hey, there's still voltage on that, and you were about to touch it. So good voltmeter is something I always went through. All right, so those were just some basics, stuff that I carried around with me all the time, and I asked a lot of my guys to carry that around with them as well, because it was some basic stuff. You know, I showed up there, I'm like, oh, give me a pair of pliers, and they're like, I don't have a pair of pliers. It's like, are you kidding me? How do you not have a pair of pliers out here? When you get into stuff like channel locks and pliers and pipe wrenches and stuff like that, you carry them around way less because they are super destructive to what you're working on. That's kind of like the last resort, like nothing else is working, put a pair of channel locks on it. Slip pliers on it and see if that holds it. Something like that, because most of that stuff is just, you're just going to destroy your fasteners. It's not going to be good. It's not going to be pretty. You're going to end up replacing everything you're working on. But these are the basics that you need to take general ride calls. Anything above this stuff, a lot of times you're either calling for help or you're calling for parts, and you could bring the correct stuff down with you. Some parks, some places, I know some of the bigger parks, they were very like, the tools are at the ride. Like every ride had its own set of tools. So they actually didn't require their mechanics to carry around a lot of tools with them because there were tools at every ride. And that's nice, although I've heard firsthand experience to say, well, yeah, but the tools are never there, or they're never where you need them. They're always like out and about somewhere. It's like, yeah, good point. You got a ride that's a 1/4 mile big. It's a huge ride. It's like, where are all those little tiny tools? In one spot, hopefully? Or were they left out because they were working on a break that morning, and all the tools that you need now are over there by the break where they were working on it, down on the ground or something like that. Pick up tomorrow's work. It's like, I'm just in favor of just bring your own tools. Outside of that, you get into rehab and shop work stuff, and then mechanics carry we have much bigger toolboxes back at the shop with all the bigger tools and all the bigger stuff there. But like I said, you're not really carrying those to a ride call. It's not a response thing. So you're going to leave those at the shop. The most time, you need these tools, it's because you're at a kiddie area and a seatbelt broke. And you use a screwdriver and a pair of channel locks, or a screwdriver and a crescent wrench to get behind the tub and hold the nut while you undo the big Phillips head screw that holds the seatbelt down. Because those belts aren't really meant for anchoring people into rides. They're just there as a reminder not to stand up. That's all they are. All right. I think we've done enough for this video. Those are the basic tools. I said I'd show you around, and I did. Let me know what you think of the video. Let me know if there's any other things you'd like to talk about or hear or see. I'm Ryan the Ride Mechanic. Have a good one, and remember, stay off the air gates. Bye.